The unmarked target, the obsidian hall, stretched endlessly into darkness, its walls carved from compressed neutron matter that absorbed all light and hope. This was where contracts were accepted, where death was negotiated with the cold efficiency of a business transaction. Zixter stood before the Grand Registry, his 6 eyes scanning the holographic display that showed thousands of active bounties across the known galaxy. His crystalline exoskeleton caught the faint glow of the displays, refracting it into sharp patterns across the polished floor. For 300 cycles, Zixter had been the Guild's most decorated operative. He had ended the lives of warlords, crime lords, and rogue AI entities. His success rate was absolute. 0 failures. 0 complications. He was a professional in the purest sense, a being who understood that emotion was the enemy of efficiency. Yet today, he stood before the registry not to accept a contract, but to solve a mystery that had begun to erode the Guild's foundations. The human contracts glowed in soft amber, a color the Guild used to mark hazardous assignments. But these weren't hazardous because humans were dangerous warriors or technological marvels. They were hazardous because every assassin who accepted them either vanished completely or returned fundamentally broken. Master Killweave, a legendary arachnoid operative who had eliminated entire planetary governments, had taken a human contract 18 cycles ago. She returned 3 days later, dissolved her guild membership, and now ran a shelter for orphan children on a backwater colony. She refused to explain what happened, only saying that she couldn't anymore. Zixter's mandibles clicked in thought as he pulled up the data files. 73 human contracts had been issued in the past 50 cycles. Only 12 were completed, and of those 12, 8 of the assassins had immediately retired from the profession. The remaining contractors had disappeared without a trace. No bodies were ever found. No distress signals were ever sent. They simply stopped existing. The pattern was statistically impossible unless humans possessed some kind of defense, mechanism that current galactic science couldn't detect or explain. He activated his personal terminal and sent a FALA, priority message to the Guild Master, a request that had never been made in the organization's 5,000-year history. He wanted to investigate the human phenomenon before accepting any contract. The response came within seconds. A single word floated in the holographic display: approved. Even the Guild Master, it seemed, wanted answers. Zixter's investigation began in the Guild's classified archives, deep within the crystalline memory cores that stored every mission report since the organization's founding. He accessed the testimonies of the few assassins who had been willing to speak about their encounters with humans. The reports were fragmentary, often incoherent, but certain themes repeated with disturbing consistency. One Graxian sniper wrote, "The human saw me. Not my position, not my weapon. She saw me. She waved. Why did she wave?" Another entry, from a Keltheron infiltrator known for his psychological warfare expertise, simply read, "They ask questions. They want to know about you. They care. I don't understand. I can't do this." The most detailed report came from an operative named Shalix, a Therinian psychic whose species could read emotional states across vast distances. His account had been sealed by the Guild Council, but Zixter's clearance granted him access. The document made his internal fluids run cold. Shalix described tracking a human scientist named Dr. Marcus Webb across 3 star systems. When he finally cornered Webb in an abandoned research station, ready to deliver the killing strike, the human had simply looked at him and asked, "Are you okay? You seem troubled." According to Shalix's report, that question had triggered a complete psychological cascade. The human hadn't defended himself or begged for mercy. Instead, he had offered Shalix tea and spent 6 hours listening to him talk about his childhood trauma, his regrets, his fears. By the time dawn broke over the research station, Shalix couldn't pull the trigger. He couldn't even think about it. He wrote, "Humans have weaponized empathy. They turn your own consciousness against you. They make you see yourself through their eyes, and their eyes are impossibly kind." Zixter closed the file and made his decision. He would observe a human directly, study this supposed defense mechanism, and determine if it was a genuine threat or simply the result of weak-minded operatives. He selected his target carefully from the active contracts. A human merchant captain named Sarah Chun, currently docked at the Epsilon Trading Nexus, a neutral station on the edge of Federation space. The contract was straightforward: permanent removal, minimal collateral damage, payment of 15,000 credits. The client was listed as anonymous, routed through 17 proxy accounts. Standard corporate cleanup, most likely. The Epsilon Trading Nexus was a massive orbital structure, home to thousands of species, conducting business in a lawless buffer zone between major galactic powers. Zixter arrived on a commercial transport, his appearance disguised by a personal cloaking field that made him appear as a common Zenthi trader. He tracked Sarah Chun's movements for 3 full cycles, learning her patterns, her habits, her vulnerabilities. She captained a small cargo vessel called the Wandering Star, employed a crew of 6 mixed species, and had an unremarkable trade route specializing in agricultural equipment and medical supplies. What struck Zixter as unusual was how the crew interacted with her. The first officer, a massive Thragonian who could crush steel with his bare hands, brought her coffee every morning and called her Cap with obvious affection. The engineer, a nervous Pixith who rarely spoke to anyone, would spend hours explaining technical problems to Sarah as if she were a trusted confidant. Even the station's dock workers, beings who typically treated ship captains with cold professionalism, seemed to light up when Sarah walked past. She remembered their names. She asked about their families. She helped them carry heavy cargo, even though it wasn't her job. Zixter identified the perfect opportunity on the 4th cycle. Sarah had scheduled a private meeting in one of the station's isolated cargo bays to inspect a shipment of medical equipment. The bay would be empty, no security cameras, no witnesses. He could complete the contract and depart before her crew even realized she was gone. He entered the cargo bay an hour early, positioning himself in the shadows behind a stack of shipping containers, his weapon primed and ready. All he had to do was wait. Sarah Chun arrived exactly on schedule, her footsteps echoing through the cavernous space. She was smaller than he expected, barely reaching standard human height, with dark hair pulled into a practical ponytail and wearing a worn flight jacket covered in patches from various stations and colonies. She walked to the center of the bay, checked her datapad, and then did something that made Zixter's weapon hand hesitate. She called out into the empty space, "I know you're there. You might as well come out. I made extra coffee." Zixter remained motionless. It was a bluff. Humans had poor sensory capabilities compared to most species. There was no way she could have detected him. But Sarah continued speaking, her voice calm and strangely gentle. The meeting was fake. "I've known someone was following me since the 2nd day. You're good, really good, but my first officer used to be military intelligence." He spotted the pattern. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to come out. We're going to have a conversation like civilized beings, and then you're going to make a choice. Sound fair?" Against every instinct, every protocol drilled into him through centuries of training, Zixter deactivated his cloaking field and stepped into the light. He kept his weapon raised, aimed at her center mass. Sarah didn't flinch. She didn't even look at the weapon. She looked at him, directly at his eyes, and smiled. It wasn't a predatory smile, or a nervous smile. It was the smile of someone genuinely pleased to meet another living being. "There you are," she said warmly, reaching into a small container she'd been carrying and producing 2 insulated cups. I wasn't sure what species you'd be, so I brought plain coffee. Fair warning, humans make it strong. Sit with me. She gestured to a nearby cargo crate, as if they were friends meeting for a casual chat. Zixther's weapon stayed raised, but his finger moved away from the trigger. This wasn't how targets behaved. This wasn't how any of this was supposed to work. You're here to kill me, Sarah continued, sitting down on the crate and taking a sip from one of the cups. Someone paid you a lot of money, I'm guessing. Corporate rival, ex-business partner, maybe someone I accidentally offended. Doesn't really matter. What matters is that you're good at what you do. Probably the best, or they wouldn't have sent you. So let me ask you something. What happens after? After? Zixther heard himself respond, his voice modulator creating harsh clicking sounds in the standard trade language. After you complete your contract, where do you go? What do you do? Do you have anyone waiting for you? Do you have something that makes you happy? Or is it just the next job, and the next job, and the next job, until one day you're the target instead of the weapon? Sarah's questions weren't accusatory. They were curious, genuinely interested, as if she actually cared about the answer. Zixther lowered his weapon slightly. This was the trap. This was the defense mechanism. She was getting inside his head, making him think about things that professionals didn't think about. He tried to raise the weapon again, to remember his training, but Sarah kept talking. I'm not trying to trick you, she said softly. I'm just wondering if you've ever thought about whether this is what you actually want, or if it's just what you're good at. There's a difference, you know. Being good at something doesn't mean it's the thing you should be doing. The weapon felt impossibly heavy in his hands. No one had ever asked him these questions. No one in the guild ever spoke about purpose or happiness or choice. They were tools, refined and perfected instruments of a single function. But Sarah Chun looked at him like he was more than that, like he was a person capable of wanting something beyond the next contract. Why aren't you afraid? He asked, and immediately regretted the question. It made him sound uncertain, vulnerable. Sarah smiled again, and this time it was tinged with sadness. Oh, I'm terrified. My heart is racing, my hands are shaking, and I really hope I don't throw up from the adrenaline. But fear doesn't mean I stop seeing you as a person. You're here because someone wants me dead, but that doesn't make you evil. It makes you someone doing a job. Maybe a job you're questioning right now, which is why we're talking, instead of, well, the alternative. She extended one of the coffee cups toward him. So here's my offer. Put the weapon down, have some terrible human coffee with me, and tell me about yourself. Really tell me. What brought you to this moment? And then, when we're done talking, you can make your choice. Walk away. Complete your contract, whatever you need to do. But at least make that choice as a person, not as a tool someone else is using. Zixther stared at the cup. It was such a small thing, a simple gesture, but it carried the weight of something he couldn't quite name. In 300 cycles of contracts, no target had ever offered him kindness. No target had ever suggested he might be worth more than his function. The weapon slipped from his hands and clattered on the metal floor. He reached out with a trembling claw and took the cup. It was warm, and somehow that warmth felt like the first real thing he'd experienced in centuries. The unbreakable protocol, the guild's inner sanctum, had not convened a full emergency council in over 800 cycles. The last time had been during the Cascade Wars, when 3 member species had attempted to use the guild as a weapon of mass extinction. Now, representatives from 47 different species sat in the circular chamber, their forms ranging from crystalline entities to massive gas cloud beings contained in specialized atmospheric suits. At the center of the obsidian table, a holographic display showed a simple image that had brought them all together, the human genetic marker, spiraling in soft blue light. Guildmaster Tervax, an ancient Keltheron whose psychic presence filled the room like a weight, opened the session with a statement that would have been unthinkable a cycle ago. We are here to discuss the implementation of Protocol Omega-7, the permanent removal of an entire species from all guild contracts. The species in question is humanity. A wave of shock rippled through the chamber. Protocol Omega-7 had only been used 3 times in guild history, reserved for species that posed existential threats to assassin operatives. The Void Wraiths, beings that existed partially outside normal spacetime, had been declared untouchable after they demonstrated the ability to follow assassins across dimensional barriers. The Hive Mothers of Zero Prime earned their protection after their death triggered psychic feedback that killed anyone within 10 light years. The third species, the Architects, had simply been too powerful to approach. But humans? They were weak, technologically average, and had no natural defenses beyond basic tool use. This is absurd, declared Scarf, a Dravonian representative whose species prided themselves on their hunting prowess. Humans are soft-bodied, slow, and lack any significant combat adaptations. We have killed billions of beings far more dangerous. What makes these creatures special? Tervax's psychic touch was cold and deliberate. That is precisely why we are here. To understand what 17 cycles of data have shown us. Humans are not unkillable because they are strong. They are unkillable because killing them breaks the killer. The holographic display shifted, showing a cascade of mission reports, psychological evaluations, and retirement notices. Of the 73 contracts issued on human targets, 12 were completed. 8 of those assassins immediately left the guild. 4 others have shown severe psychological trauma and are no longer field capable. The remaining 61 contracts resulted in mission abandonment, operative disappearance, or active protection of the target by the assigned assassin. A Vraxian council member leaned forward, her thermal sensors glowing with curiosity. You're suggesting humans have a defensive weapon we cannot detect? Some kind of psychic field or emotional manipulation technology? No, came a voice from the chamber entrance. All heads turned as Zixther entered, his crystalline form moving with the fluid grace that had made him legendary. He carried with him no weapons, no equipment, just a small insulated container that looked distinctly human in design. It's not a weapon. It's who they are. The council chamber erupted in confusion and anger. Zixther had been missing for 6 cycles after accepting the Sarachon contract. His sudden reappearance should have been cause for celebration, but something about him had changed. His movements were different, less mechanical, more contemplative. His eyes, usually cold and analytical, held something that looked disturbingly like peace. "Explain yourself," Tervax commanded. His psychic voice cutting through the chaos. Zixther placed the container on the table. Inside were 2 cups of coffee, now cold, but carefully preserved. I was assigned to eliminate a human merchant captain. Standard contract, standard target. I tracked her, studied her, identified the perfect moment to complete the mission. And then she offered me coffee and asked me about my life. He paused, and for the first time in his 300 cycles of service, his voice carried emotion. She didn't try to fight me. She didn't try to escape. She saw me, truly saw me, and decided that I was worth talking to. She asked me questions no one had ever asked. She listened to answers I didn't know I had. And when I finally had the chance to complete my contract, I realized that killing her would mean destroying something irreplaceable, the first person who ever made me feel like I mattered beyond my function. The council chamber fell into stunned silence. This was unprecedented. Guild operatives were conditioned from creation or recruitment to suppress emotional responses. The very idea that a simple conversation could override centuries of training was incomprehensible. "This is why we must act," Tervax said, his psychic presence heavy with something that might have been regret. "But before we vote on Protocol Omega-7, you must understand the full scope of what we face. Zixther's experience is not unique. It is the pattern. Let me show you what humanity has done to the galaxy." The holographic display expanded, filling the chamber with a three-dimensional map of known space. Thousands of systems glowed with various colors, representing different political allegiances and cultural zones. But threaded through all of it, like a subtle network of golden filaments, were human trade routes, diplomatic missions, and cultural exchanges. Humanity entered the galactic stage 112 cycles ago, Tervax explained. They had faster-than-light travel, basic energy weapons, and diplomatic protocols that seemed naive and inefficient. Every military analysis suggested they would be conquered or absorbed within a generation. Instead, look at what happened. The display shifted to show historical data. Human colonies appeared as small points of light, slowly spreading across previously contested territories. But around each colony, something strange occurred. Conflict zones cooled. Trade agreements multiplied. Species that had been at war for centuries suddenly found themselves negotiating peace treaties with human mediators present. At first, we assumed this was political manipulation, a Thragonian council member suggested. Perhaps sophisticated intelligence operations or economic coercion. "We thought that too," Tervax agreed. The Federation's Internal Security Council commissioned 3 separate investigations. What they found was far more disturbing than any conspiracy. The display zoomed in on a specific system, showing detailed social network analysis. Humans don't manipulate. They integrate. They learn your language, your customs, your history. They ask about your family. They remember your name. They share meals with you and tell stories about their own struggles and triumphs. And slowly, unconsciously, you begin to see them not as aliens or competitors or targets, but as friends. Zixther stepped forward, his voice steady. "I spent 6 cycles with Sarah Chun and her crew. She didn't keep me prisoner. I was free to leave at any moment, free to complete my contract. But every day, she and her crew treated me like I belonged. Her first officer taught me a Thragonian card game. Her engineer showed me family pictures and complained about her mother's criticism of her career choices. Sarah herself would sit with me in the cargo bay at night, and we would talk about philosophy, about purpose, about what it means to build something instead of destroy it." He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of representatives who had known him for centuries. "Here's what I learned about humans. They're terrifying not because they're strong, but because they're relentless in their belief that everyone deserves a chance to be better. They don't see enemies. They see people who haven't become friends yet. And that perspective is contagious. It gets inside you and changes how you see yourself and everyone around you." A young Pixith council member, barely old enough to hold his position, spoke up with trembling vocal cords. "But surely this is a weakness? This emotional openness, this inability to maintain proper boundaries between allies and enemies. It should make them vulnerable." "That's what the Kreth Dominion thought," Tervax replied grimly. The display shifted to show a military engagement from 71 cycles ago. When humanity first encountered the Kreth, diplomatic relations failed. The Kreth saw humans as weak and launched a preemptive strike against 3 human colonies. They killed approximately 14 million civilians. The display showed the aftermath: burning cities, shattered settlements, mourning crowds. The Kreth expected humanity to surrender or retreat. Instead, they witnessed something that changed every military doctrine in the galaxy. The display showed human fleet movements, but they weren't standard military formations. They were strange, chaotic, creative in ways that defied conventional tactics. Humans have a saying, Zixter interjected. Proportional response is optional. When the Kreth killed 14 million civilians, humanity didn't just retaliate. They systematically dismantled the entire Kreth military infrastructure in 6 months. They didn't target civilians, didn't engage in atrocities, but they fought with a level of coordinated fury that shocked every military observer. And then they stopped, Travax continued. The moment the Kreth government surrendered, humanity immediately shifted to humanitarian aid. They rebuilt Kreth cities. They provided medical supplies. They offered trade agreements and cultural exchanges. Within 2 cycles, the Kreth who had tried to exterminate humanity were calling humans their closest allies. That's the pattern. Humans will be your friend until you threaten their survival. And if you do threaten them, they will fight with terrifying efficiency until you stop. And then they'll help you rebuild and offer you friendship again. The implications settled over the council like a heavy fog. This wasn't about individual contracts or isolated incidents. This was about a species that had somehow weaponized empathy without even realizing it. A species that turned every interaction into a potential recruitment opportunity, not through coercion, but through genuine connection. I have spent the last 6 cycles interviewing the assassins who abandoned their human contracts, Travax said. The stories are remarkably consistent. A Keltheron infiltrator named Vexith was hired to eliminate a human teacher. She spent 3 days observing her target, watching him work with young students from a dozen different species. On the 3rd day, the teacher noticed her surveillance and invited her to speak to the class about her culture. She ended up teaching for 6 weeks and is now the school's permanent security consultant. She sends gifts to the teacher's family on human holidays. Another image appeared, showing a massive Thragonian warrior. Korgath accepted a contract to kill a human engineer who had discovered evidence of corporate malfeasance. He tracked her to a deep space station and cornered her in a maintenance tunnel. She was terrified, begging for her life. And then she noticed Korgath was injured from a previous mission. She stopped begging and started trying to help him, using her engineering knowledge to fashion a medical brace for his damaged limb. Korgath is now her business partner. They run a free clinic for undocumented station workers. The stories continued, each one a variation on the same impossible theme. Humans possessed no natural weapons, no evolutionary advantages, no technological superiority. But they had something far more powerful, the unshakable belief that every being they encountered had value, that every life could be changed, that friendship was always possible. The integration theory, Travax explained, suggests that humans evolved on a death world where cooperation was the only viable survival strategy. They learned to form bonds across genetic lines, to empathize with beings different from themselves, to see potential allies in former enemies. This wasn't conscious strategy. It was evolutionary necessity. And now, as they spread across the galaxy, they're unconsciously applying that same strategy to every species they meet. Scarth, the Dravonian who had earlier dismissed the threat, now looked disturbed. You're saying they're changing the galaxy's fundamental power dynamics through friendship? I'm saying they already have, Travax replied. The Council has documented over 2,000 instances where humans have mediated conflicts, established trade routes through hostile territory, or convinced opposing factions to negotiate. They're not conquerors. They're social glue, and every being they interact with becomes part of their network, another node in an ever-expanding web of mutual support and cooperation. Zixter activated his personal display, showing the image of Sarah Chun and her mixed-species crew. Sarah is not exceptional among humans. She's average. That's what makes this so profound. Every human has this capability to some degree. They build communities wherever they go. They turn strangers into family. And they do it so naturally, so effortlessly, that you don't even realize it's happening until you would rather die than hurt them. The vote on Protocol Omega-7 was unanimous. Humanity was officially declared off-limits to all guild contracts, not because they were invulnerable, but because killing a human required the assassin to first destroy their own capacity for connection, their own ability to see targets as people. And once that capacity was destroyed, the assassin became something less than themselves. Something broken beyond repair. As the council dispersed, Zixter remained in the chamber, looking at the cold coffee he'd preserved from his first meeting with Sarah Chun. Turvak's psychic presence touched his mind gently. "What will you do now?" "Sarah offered me a position on her crew," Zixter said. "Ship's security consultant. She said I'd be good at it, since I know how criminals think. I believe I will accept. You're abandoning the guild?" There was no judgment in Turvak's question, only curiosity. "No," Zixter replied. "I'm choosing something better. For 300 cycles, I was a weapon. Sarah Chun saw me and decided I could be a person instead. I think I'd like to find out what that feels like." He turned to leave, then paused at the threshold. "The humans have a saying. People will forget what you said. People will forget what you did. But people will never forget how you made them feel. That's their weapon, Guildmaster. They make you feel like you matter. And once you feel that, you can't go back to being just a tool." As Zixter departed, Turvax was left alone in the empty chamber, contemplating the most profound truth that had emerged from this investigation. Humanity's greatest survival strategy wasn't their technology or their weapons or their resilience. It was their stubborn, relentless insistence that every being they encountered deserved dignity, respect, and a chance at friendship. In a galaxy built on power hierarchies and survival of the fittest, humans had introduced a revolutionary concept. What if everyone could win? The Galactic Assassins Guild, an organization that had existed for 5,000 years as the ultimate expression of cold, efficient violence, had just learned a lesson that would reshape the future of galactic civilization. Some species survive through strength. Some survive through cunning. Humans survive by making everyone around them want them to survive. And against that defense, there was no counter-strategy, no weapon, no tactic that could prevail. The era of humanity as prey had ended not with a battle, but with countless cups of coffee shared between strangers who became friends. End of story *.